The message came at exactly 8:03 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was halfway through microwaving a leftover slice of lasagna, humming quietly to myself, trying to finish one last report before logging off for the night. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was just another group ping from my coworkers. Then I saw the sender. Family group chat. I froze. It wasn't unusual for my parents to send texts, but a group message? That was different. I unlocked the phone and read. "We think it's best if you take a step back from the family for now. Everyone needs space, especially Megan. No emojis. No, hope you understand. No private text. Just the words, blunt and unpolished, delivered like a verdict." I stared at the screen, fork suspended mid-air, the lasagna growing cold. The group included my parents, my sister Megan, my Aunt Claudia, and my Uncle Leo. The latter two rarely spoke, yet their presence in the chat made the message heavier, almost ceremonial. My thumb hovered over the reply button. What could I even say to that? Understood. I'll respect your decision. I did nothing for several minutes, watching the cursor blink on the blank reply screen. The smell of lasagna, usually comforting, now reminded me of a life I was too exhausted to care about. When I finally typed, my fingers were steady, almost too steady. Understood. I'll take a step back. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. Later that night, I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, and opened the spreadsheet I had kept hidden for 5 years, the one I maintained to track the family's finances. Rent, utilities, medical bills, therapy payments, car repairs, groceries, insurance. Every payment I'd made quietly, methodically, without complaint. It had all been in my name, routed through accounts I controlled. No one asked. No one noticed. I remembered the first time I realized how much my family relied on me. Megan had been hospitalized for the 3rd time that year. My mom called me crying from the pharmacy parking lot, clutching a prescription she couldn't afford. My dad's warehouse hours had been cut. And there I was, 27, single, working 80 hours a week, paying for everything with money I barely had. I told myself it was love. But love, I realized now, wasn't supposed to feel like a leash. I opened the family fund account I had set up years ago and froze it. I removed my automatic contributions. Then, I closed it entirely. Every joint authorization revoked. Every credit card canceled. My stomach tightened with a mix of fear and anticipation. I knew what would come next. I had been the invisible current holding everything together, and now I had turned off the faucet. Sure enough, at 3:22 a.m., my phone began to buzz like a swarm of angry bees. One missed call, then another, and then hundreds more. By sunrise, I had 92 missed calls. My father's voicemail was frantic, his voice trembling with panic. "Angelita, what happened? Are you okay? Why would you do this? The bank flagged everything." I listened twice. Then I replied with one sentence. "I am honoring your request. I've stepped back." No explanation. No argument. Just the truth I had finally claimed for myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. For years, I had been the family's financial firewall. Megan needed therapy. I paid for it. My mother's insulin? Covered. Dad's mortgage? I kept the payments on time. Emergencies, bills, overdrafts. I cleaned up after them silently. And every time, the family congratulated themselves for surviving while I was quietly disappearing under the weight of their chaos. I remembered the night Megan called me in tears after a DUI left her car impounded. My credit card, my savings, my quiet labor saved her again. The family celebrated her recovery, but no one ever asked how I was doing. Not once. That night, after closing the account, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a strange, hollow relief. The phone's incessant buzzing was a reminder, yes, but it was also proof. Proof that for 5 years I had held them together with nothing but patience and money. And now, for the first time, I was free to let them deal with their own consequences. Megan texted me the next morning, not in the group, but directly. Her tone sharp, rehearsed. "Why would you do this? You knew I needed that payment." I didn't reply immediately. I let the message sit. I knew that sitting in silence would sting more than anything I could type. And in that silence, I realized something essential. Stepping back wasn't abandonment. It was the first act of self-preservation I had allowed myself in a decade. By mid-morning, my phone looked like it had been attacked by a small army. Missed calls, voicemails, texts stacked on top of each other. Every notification was a spike of adrenaline, each one a reminder that the quiet I'd hoped for was only temporary. My heart pounded as I listened to the first voicemail. "Angelita, what have you done?" The fund, everything bounced. Mom's insulin, the mortgage, Megan's rent. "You can't just, we trusted you." My father's voice cracked halfway through. He was frantic, scared, and angered all at once. I pressed play on the second voicemail, then the third, each one escalating in intensity. But I felt nothing. Not regret, not guilt, not fear. Just a cold, steady clarity I hadn't known I could hold. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at my desk, flipping open the spreadsheet I'd kept for years. I began to scroll through each transaction again, not out of habit, but to remind myself exactly what I had done for them and why stepping back was necessary. Megan texted me directly a few minutes later. "You knew I needed that payment. You left us hanging." I didn't reply. I wanted her to feel the weight of the space I had created. The silence wasn't cruelty. It was the first time she, or anyone, had to navigate their own chaos without me. By noon, the first consequences were visible. Overdraft notices began to pile into the inboxes of my parents. I received screenshots from Megan, showing her landlord's notices and her car insurance lapsing. The family, who had always depended on me for calm, for payments, for fixes, was floundering. And I watched, quietly, from across the city. I thought about the moment the message had arrived. Take a step back. They had imagined it would be a brief separation, a polite exile, perhaps even a lesson for me. They didn't realize that I had been the lifeline. Without me, the fragile network they relied on would unravel. And unravel it did. Fast. The first call from my mother came around 1 p.m., trembling with both fear and indignation. "Angelita, why would you do this? The insulin, how will I manage? What about the bills?" I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I simply said, "You asked me to step back. I am honoring that." Her sobs echoed through the line, but I remained calm. 4 years I had been the emergency. I had been the bridge over every financial chasm, the quiet janitor cleaning up messes no one else wanted to see. And now, for the first time, I wasn't. By mid-afternoon, the reality hit even harder. My father had driven to the bank in person. According to Megan, he had spent 2 hours pleading with the teller, trying to restore access to the account. Every call I ignored, every message I didn't respond to, strengthened my resolve. I wasn't their villain. I was the first person in years to refuse to be their invisible caretaker. I reflected on the years I had spent keeping the family afloat. I remembered the night Megan came home after breaking up with that abusive partner. She had no money, no plan, and nowhere to sleep. I sent her enough for a hotel and groceries, staying awake until she texted that she was safe. And no one thanked me. No one asked if I was exhausted, or if my own life was surviving alongside theirs. That night, I had cried alone in my apartment, trying to convince myself that this was love. But love doesn't mean living in the shadows while everyone else thrives. Love doesn't mean being the bank, the therapist, the emergency contact, and the personal assistant all in one. And now, they were learning the cost of their reliance. By 5 p.m., Megan's calls had turned to texts, short, sharp, pleading. "This is too much. You can't just abandon us. You promised." I stared at the screen, my coffee gone cold, my hands steady. I knew she didn't understand. I had never promised to be her safety net forever. I had promised to love her, yes, but not to sacrifice my life for her comfort. By the early evening, my phone buzzed again. My father, desperate, and my mother, exhausted, both asking the same question. Why now? Why this way? I realized then that my stepping back had done more than just freeze the funds. It had illuminated years of unspoken expectation and unbalanced responsibility. They had relied on me so heavily that the absence of my support felt like an earthquake. And yet, it was the first earthquake that wasn't my fault. That night, as I prepared dinner, this time intentionally simple, because I didn't want to overextend myself, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, the world did not feel heavy on my shoulders. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply removed myself from a system that had exploited me. And in the quiet, I understood something profound. Boundaries weren't cruel. They were essential. They weren't betrayal. They were protection. Megan texted one last time before midnight. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the story wasn't over, but the first chapter of self-preservation had begun. And for the first time, it was entirely mine. 3 days after I closed the family fund, my phone buzzed with an unexpected invitation, a Zoom call from my cousin Emily. "Just a quick check-in," she wrote. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let the chaos settle without me. But another part, the part that had spent years cleaning up after everyone else, knew I couldn't let this go unspoken. I joined. The familiar grid of faces popped up, their eyes wide, their expressions rigid. My mother sat at the head of the table, clutching her mug like a lifeline. My father paced behind his chair, jaw tight. Megan, predictably, had her arms crossed, lips pursed, eyes red from crying. And Aunt Claudia, pearls, scarf, posture perfectly upright, a faint smirk lingering on her lips as if she already knew the verdict. Emily began the call, voice nervous. "Okay, let's just talk this out. Angelita, maybe you can explain why you did it." I took a breath, letting the weight of 5 years settle on my chest. Then I spoke, calm, deliberate. "You asked me to step back. I did." Megan's face twisted. "You abandoned us," she shouted, though her voice wavered. "You knew we were counting on the fund." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't abandon you. I stopped being your emergency plan. I stopped being the silent fixer while you all lived your lives comfortably. I am not your backup anymore." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it, her lips quivering. "But the money, Angelita. You were supposed to help. Always. Always." I echoed, my voice rising slightly, not in anger but in disbelief. "Do you even know what I've been doing for you for the past 5 years? The payments, the bills, the overdrafts, the rent, the therapy? I've been the one holding everything together while you all acted as if nothing was wrong. And now that I step back, suddenly it's betrayal." The screen went silent. Megan's jaw dropped, and my father's face turned red, the flush of panic and shame spreading across it. Aunt Claudia let out a quiet scoff, but it lacked its usual confidence. I clicked the share screen button, opening the folder I had prepared but never intended to reveal. My ledger, my spreadsheets, every transaction meticulously logged. Rows and columns detailing payments for rent, utilities, prescriptions, therapy sessions, even Megan's lawyer fees and emergency hotel stays. "Do you even see this?" I asked, voice calm, almost clinical. "All of this was done by me. I managed it alone. Every dollar. Every receipt. Every deadline. And not once did anyone ask me if I could handle it, or if I was okay." Megan shifted uncomfortably, her anger faltering as the evidence of my labor stared back at her from the screen. "You've been keeping tabs on us?" my father asked, incredulous. "Not tabs," I corrected. "I've been surviving you." The silence was heavy, oppressive. My mother's hands shook over the mug. Aunt Claudia's smugness vanished, replaced by a faint flicker of guilt. Even Megan, the perpetual drama of our family, looked smaller, almost human in that moment. "You expect applause?" Megan whispered, voice barely audible. "For being responsible?" I shook my head. "No. I expect boundaries. Respect. Recognition of what I've done, yes, but more than that, I expect you to understand that I am not your safety net. I am not the person you can rely on to fix your mistakes anymore." My father's face darkened, but I saw the first cracks in the armor of their entitlement. They had assumed that stepping back would hurt me more than them. They were wrong. "You think money is everything," Aunt Claudia finally said, attempting to reassert control. "No," I replied firmly. "But it's the only thing you ever came to me for. It's the thread holding the chaos together, and I'm done holding it. If you want to survive, you'll have to learn to do it yourselves." Emily let out a quiet gasp. I didn't realize," she murmured. The weight of the ledger had shifted the room. For the first time in years, I felt the power in my own voice. I was no longer the silent executor of their comfort. I was a person demanding recognition, demanding autonomy, demanding respect. And it was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Megan's face reddened, eyes brimming with tears. You could have told us," she stammered. "I did," I said quietly. "You told me to step back. I listened. What you didn't realize is that the moment I stepped away, your lives were going to show you what my presence had really been doing. You mistook it for convenience, but it was survival, for all of you. And now you see." My mother's hands fell to her lap. My father's pacing slowed. Aunt Claudia looked away. Silence filled the screen like a tangible thing. It wasn't satisfaction that I felt. It wasn't vengeance. It was the first taste of liberation in a decade of servitude. And as the call ended, I realized that for the first time, I was not carrying anyone else's crisis on my shoulders. For the first time, their disappointment and anger no longer defined my worth. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet wash over me, and for the first time, truly allowed myself to breathe. The day after the Zoom call, my phone was quieter, but not peaceful. The initial storm of voicemails and messages had slowed, but it was replaced by a different tension, a simmering resentment that didn't need words to be felt. My parents weren't begging anymore. They were strategizing. And Megan's messages alternated between thinly veiled guilt and sharp accusations. I ignored most of them. I had learned that silence could be a stronger response than explanation. But when Megan called directly, voice small and trembling, I picked up. "Why did you have to make it so dramatic?" she whispered. "Couldn't you have just helped quietly?" "I did help quietly," I said, holding the phone loosely. "For 5 years. And you didn't notice. You didn't thank me. You didn't ask if I could keep doing it without breaking myself. This isn't drama, Megan. This is the reality of your choices catching up with you." She didn't answer. Instead, the line went silent, then clicked off. By evening, the consequences of my absence were unavoidable. Overdraft notices flooded my parents' inbox. Utility bills were unpaid. Megan's car insurance lapsed. The family, for years cocooned by my quiet interventions, was now exposed. It was difficult not to feel a quiet sense of grim satisfaction, but I tempered it with empathy. Chaos was one thing, destruction was another. I started receiving texts from distant relatives, friends, even neighbors, asking if I was okay, expressing concern over the sudden family meltdown. No one asked why I had chosen to step back. No one realized the magnitude of what I had been carrying alone. It was exhausting to think about explaining myself again. That night, as I sat in my small apartment kitchen, I reflected on the years of sacrifice. Every emergency I had managed, every quiet payment made to patch the holes in their lives, they had assumed it was love, or responsibility, or some magical sense of duty. They never recognized it as labor. Emotional, financial, and mental labor, all on my shoulders. I thought about the time Megan had called me in the middle of a Friday night, panicked because her apartment's heating system failed. I had driven across the city with cash in my purse to pay for a repair, missing a deadline at work. Or the time my mother's prescription had nearly run out because she forgot to refill it. I had quietly taken care of it as always, so that no one would have to stress. It wasn't charity. It wasn't optional. It had been survival, their survival, not mine. By the second day, the family attempted to contact me collectively again. Emily sent another Zoom invite, cautiously worded this time, "We just want to work things out." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to finally step away completely, to let the natural consequences teach them what boundaries meant. But another part of me, the part still tied by years of habit, agreed to a brief check-in. The call was tense from the start. My mother's voice was thin, brittle with fatigue. "We didn't realize how much depended on you," she said softly, almost ashamed. "You didn't realize because you never asked," I said quietly, holding my calm like a shield. "I've been carrying this family for 5 years, and you treated it as convenience, not care." Megan's eyes filled with tears. I didn't see it. I thought you were always here because you wanted to be." "I was here because I had no choice," I admitted. "You didn't need me. You wanted me. And I stopped wanting to be the default adult in your lives." The room went quiet. It was a different quiet this time. Not panic, not anger, but reflection. For the first time, they saw me not as a caretaker but as a person who had lived in the shadows while their lives continued uninterrupted. I realized then that independence didn't come with loud declarations or dramatic gestures. It came quietly, in the space you create for yourself, in the decisions you make that prioritize your own well-being over the expectations of others. Later that evening, I walked through my small apartment, looking at the bare walls and the single chair by the window. There was peace here, quiet, unassuming, and mine. No bills to cover for anyone else. No emergencies to solve. Just the sound of my own thoughts, the rhythm of my own breathing. That night, I allowed myself something I hadn't in years, a deep, uninterrupted sleep. No phone buzzing, no anxiety pressing on my chest, no expectation of crisis. Just rest. And in that rest, I felt the first taste of liberation. It wasn't that my family had changed. It wasn't that Megan suddenly understood or that my parents admitted their failings. It was that I had changed. I had recognized my limits, asserted my boundaries, and chosen my own well-being over their comfort. And that realization, small as it felt in the moment, was the seed of everything to come. By the end of the week, the full impact of my decision hit in ways I hadn't entirely anticipated. Overnight, my parents' financial mismanagement spilled into places I hadn't thought possible. I started receiving texts from the bank, not to me, but from worried tellers and managers who recognized my name as the co-signer on accounts and the sole point of contact. "We noticed unusual activity on your accounts," one email read, polite yet urgent. "Please confirm transactions." I knew immediately what it meant. They had tried to access loans, credit lines, maybe even refinance without telling me. My stomach tightened, but my hands were steady. I had anticipated this. I had closed every joint authorization. They couldn't touch a dime. I spent the next 2 days contacting banks, explaining every closure, filing reports, and submitting statements. I emailed documentation of every transaction over the last 5 years, screenshots, receipts, even the ledger I had shown the family. Each click and submission felt like reclaiming a small piece of my power. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was protecting myself, finally, unapologetically. Meanwhile, Megan's calls had slowed, replaced by hesitant texts. Her tone was shifting, softer, uncertain. I didn't realize. I knew you helped, but I never thought. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Not yet. Words weren't necessary. Actions had spoken louder than any apology could. That weekend, I took a walk through my new neighborhood, breathing an air that felt entirely mine. No urgent calls, no looming financial crises, no demands from anyone who assumed my labor was invisible. For the first time in years, the world was not pressing down on me. The relief was accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. I realized the patterns I had been trapped in were not just my family's, they were generational. Parents relying on the oldest child to be invisible labor. Siblings expecting intervention, rescue, bailout. A cycle I could either continue or break. And I chose to break it. Later that week, a thick envelope arrived from the bank. Inside were rejected credit applications, loan attempts, and documents that named me as co-signer without my knowledge. Megan's yoga retreat request, which had once seemed trivial and indulgent, suddenly felt like part of a larger pattern of entitlement. Someone had tried to commit me to liability without my consent. I called the police, filed reports, and emailed the IRS to document potential fraud. It was exhausting, but necessary. Each form I submitted, each statement I printed and scanned, was a reclaiming of control I had never experienced before. For years, my family had assumed I would always be the safety net. Now I was the gatekeeper of my own life. Through it all, I felt something unexpected. Freedom in action. I wasn't running from them. I was running toward myself. Each resolved alert, each thwarted attempt to drag me back into their crises, was a reinforcement of my autonomy. By the end of the month, my parents had stopped calling altogether. Megan emailed cautiously, asking questions about rent, therapy, bills, but I remained silent. This wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. I had spent too long ensuring their lives were comfortable at the expense of my own. No more. I spent evenings at my apartment reading, cooking simple meals, connecting with friends without the background anxiety of what could be wrong now. The silence wasn't empty. It was a buffer I hadn't known I needed. Each quiet moment strengthened me, reminded me that my worth was not measured by the crises I solved for others. Then, one morning, a text from Tyler appeared, Megan's ex. I hadn't spoken to him in years. His message was short, simple, and unexpected. I don't know if this matters anymore, but thank you. You weren't the only thing she needed saving from. I stared at the screen, not because I sought validation, but because someone had recognized the truth out loud. I hadn't been cruel. I had been carrying everyone else's mess. And when I stopped, what followed was not punishment. It was accountability for them and liberation for me. It was strange, watching the ripple effects of my choice unfold. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations. Just clarity. A few weeks later, a distant cousin reached out privately. I never told anyone, but you're not alone. I've been in your shoes. For the first time, I realized something profound. There were others like me. People who had carried families, households, and crises on their own, silently, without recognition. Stepping away hadn't just freed me, it had illuminated a pattern, a shared experience that had been normalized as duty but was truly exploitation. And in that realization, I found both anger and compassion. Anger for the years I had been taken for granted, and compassion for those still trapped, still carrying burdens they never signed up for. The weeks passed. I settled into my new apartment, my routines uninterrupted by family emergencies. I began sleeping through the night, no longer scanning emails obsessively, no longer bracing for chaos. I had survived the storm, and I was stronger for it. Months passed, and the world outside my apartment became something I could finally breathe in without fear. No buzzing phones, no frantic texts, no midnight emergencies demanding my attention. The apartment was still modest. Bare walls, a single chair by the window, but it was mine. Every item, every corner reflected choices I had made for myself, not for anyone else. The family stopped calling altogether. Megan reached out occasionally, carefully measured messages that sought assistance without apology, but I ignored them. I had learned that silence could be louder than words. It wasn't cruelty, it was the boundary I had needed all along. I began to notice changes within myself that surprised me. I slept deeply, uninterrupted. My mornings were mine alone. I cooked the meals I wanted, without counting calories or stretching my budget for someone else. I spent weekends with friends, exploring the city, hiking trails I had never had time for, seeing films I wanted to see. The freedom wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, yet profound. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of amber and lilac, my phone buzzed. A message from Tyler, Megan's ex. I hadn't expected him to reach out. "I don't know if this matters anymore, but I wanted to thank you again. You saved more than just Megan." I stared at the text for a long moment. The validation wasn't the point. The point was that someone had recognized the truth out loud, that I hadn't been cruel or negligent. I had been carrying the burdens of others without acknowledgement, without support, without pause. And when I stopped, the ripple effects of responsibility shifted, finally landing where it belonged, on the ones creating the chaos, not the one who had been silently fixing it. Over time, I began to reflect more deeply on what stepping back had taught me. It wasn't just about the money, though finances had been a large part of the story. It was about power, boundaries, and self-worth. I had spent years believing that my value was tied to my capacity to endure, to solve, to save. And in doing so, I had erased myself, my needs, and my freedom. By taking a step back, I reclaimed not just my finances, but my life. My energy was my own again. My decisions belonged to me, not dictated by guilt or expectation. And in that reclamation, I found a quiet pride that had nothing to do with recognition from others. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected email. It was from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "I just want you to know. I've seen what you did. You're not alone. You shouldn't have had to carry it, but you weren't the only one carrying it for so long." The words warmed me in a way I hadn't realized I craved. For the first time, I understood that my struggle wasn't personal failure. It was part of a pattern, a generational expectation that someone always bears the weight. And now, I had chosen to break the cycle. I looked around my apartment that evening, the quiet humming through the space like a soft melody. I was free from obligations that weren't mine. I had not abandoned my family. I had simply stopped allowing myself to be invisible labor for their comfort. And that was not selfish. That was survival. That was liberation. Months turned into almost a year. My parents and Megan attempted contact occasionally. A text here, a message there. But the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I didn't respond. My presence, my care, my labor, they had once assumed it was automatic. Now, it was neither expected nor given. And in that space, I finally thrived. I began volunteering at a local community center, helping individuals who were struggling with crises similar to those I had once carried for my family. But this time, it was choice, not obligation. I realized my capacity to help others could exist without erasing my own life. It was a delicate balance, but it was empowering. By the first anniversary of the family fund closure, I had moved fully into my new life. The apartment had been furnished, not extravagantly, but thoughtfully. Plants by the window, books stacked in uneven piles, soft music filling the space in the evenings. I was living on my terms, and the quiet satisfaction of that was immeasurable. One evening, as I closed my laptop after another day of work and community planning, I allowed myself a small smile. I had survived years of silent labor, exploitation, and invisible burdens. I had navigated betrayal, confrontation, chaos, and manipulation. And now I had emerged whole. I was free. I didn't need apologies, recognition, or gratitude from those who had depended on me without seeing me. I only needed myself. And that I finally had. In stepping back, I hadn't lost my family. I had found myself. And for the first time in my life, I understood what that truly meant.